A person seems to be running while panting heaving. An old man is holding off a person who's holding a gun, warning Kim Jun to run away while he holds him there. Kim Jun, scared, keeps apologizing to the old man in his mind as he continues to run. He continues to run while crying. Suddenly, the loud noise of a gunshot echoes. Holding onto his shooter's lab coat with his face buried in his own blood, the old man murmurs about a chip. Crying in agony as he keeps running while holding something in his hand, she screams out apologizing to the old man, Kim Hee-won. Two masked men hiding by the stairs entrance while one of them is shooting at shields held by people downstairs. Policemen, wearing bulletproof vests, helmets, goggles, and masks. Downstairs, holding human-sized bulletproof shields, completely blocking off the barrage of bullets coming their way, while reporting their situation and surroundings to the one looking over this mission. Putting a small cylinder on the screen, he commands two teams, Alpha and Tango 5, to be ready to breach the 4th floor of the research building on his command. Giving his command, 5 soldiers while hanging with a rope in front of the window. 3 out of the 5 shoot at the window, making cracks on it, while the other 2, after kicking the wall, swing back, ready to break in through the cracked glass. With them finally making contact with the window, it shatters, with countless glass shards of varying sizes flying in. 2 masked men, guarding that floor, start shooting in the direction of the shattered window. More skilled than the masked men, the policemen, right after breaking through the window, get into position, shooting down the masked men. A news channel, showing the photo of Korean ADD, Agency for Defense Development, on the headlines, shared the news of a terrorist attack on ADD. The reporter continues saying that with the reports received from the scene, it is currently known that most of the terrorists have been subdued. The reporter continues saying about the target the terrorists were trying to accomplish, it being the KF-21 Block 2 fighter jet, ESA radar, and the Hyunmoo-V strategic ballistic missile. The reporter continues to speak, saying it has been revealed that the terrorists were planning to steal the ADD data chip, which contains the design and material technology of Korea's most advanced weapons. Holding onto the chip in his hands tightly, scared and sweating, breathing heavily from fear while hiding behind something. The person who killed Kim Hee-won stands there at the doorstep with the gun in his hand and Kim Hee-won's blood on his coat. He then calls out to Kim Jun, to which he flinches on hearing his name suddenly. Still standing at the doorstep, he says that he knows he's hiding here, telling him to hand over the chip to him. Seemingly tired, wiping off his sweat from under his chin, he says if it weren't for Kim Jun running off with the chip, he would have already escaped it. With a heavy tone, he speaks to Kim Jun, who's still hiding, telling him if he were to just hand over the chip, he'd spare him and even offer him a huge sum of money for keeping his mouth shut. Scared and sweaty, while his hands tremble from fear, Kim Jun knows that the value of the chip is far greater than his own life. With no other way left to keep the chip from being taken, with his hands still trembling, he swallows it. Having just swallowed it, Lee Ho-jung, the one with the gun who killed Kim Hee-won, suddenly arrives from behind, scaring Kim Jun. He then dumbfoundedly asks if he swallowed it. With worry and anger showing on his face and his eyes bulging out in shock, he suddenly screams at the top of his lungs, realizing that Kim Jun swallowed the chip. Cussing him out, he shoots him in the stomach a couple of times. Getting hit, he falls to the ground. Lying on the ground with his eyes having rolled back, Lee Ho-jung grabs his collar. Pulling him up by his collar, Lee Ho-jung yells at him, asking as to why he's going this far, sacrificing his life for the chip. Painstakingly bringing his one arm up, he taunts Lee Ho-jung, calling him a traitorous bastard while showing him his middle finger. Lee Ho-jung shows an unreadable expression with tears welling in his eyes. Before he could say anything to the dying Kim Jun, policemen arrive at the doorstep, warning Lee Ho-jung that they'll shoot him if he resists. He stands up, turning towards the policeman with the gun still in his hands. The policeman starts shooting at him. With each bullet hitting him, his blood splatters around everywhere, with his gun flying off of his hands. At the limit of his life, Kim Jun lies there on the ground, coughing blood through his teeth. Relieved with the chip being safe, he closes his eyes, knowing it's about time. After a while, a news channel announces of the ADD chip being found in the stomach of Kim Jun, who was killed in the terrorist attack. She follows with that the government has decided to award Kim Jun the Order of National Security Merit, Unification Medal, for protecting the chip with his life. Speaking to himself in his head, Kim Jun asks himself if he's dead. And if he's dead, how's he still able to think? He notices a woman he doesn't identify, crouching beside him with her hand on his chest, tears welling the eyes of the woman, to which he thinks if maybe this is that life flashing before your eyes moment. With eyes about to burst into tears, she slaps Kim Jun, yelling at him to get a hold on himself. Kim Jun quickly gets up, holding his head, screaming in pain, questioning as to why it hurts when it was supposed to be a life flashing before your eyes moment. Worriedly, the woman asks him if he's coming back to his senses. With tears welling at the edges of his eyes, confused, He looks at the woman saying he doesn't remember what's happening in the current situation. With tears welled up in her eyes while covering her mouth in disbelief, she says that it must be because he hurt his head, while Kim Jun, after checking out his surroundings, realizes he's in a bar, but he doesn't recognize the person in front of him. Still out of it, he thinks to himself, if a life-flashing-before-your-eyes moment's supposed to be so detailed, even showing part of the past, the lady, speaking to someone while shaking Kim Jun to bring him back to his senses, says if they are out of their mind, hitting someone on the head. With a person calling her, she turns to face them. Standing before her are two men, one completely irritated saying how Kim Jun was the first to attack, while the other person pressing a cloth on his injured and bleeding head. She then notices the first person pressing a cloth soaked in blood onto his head and the shattered glass pieces on the head of another person. With worry showing on her face, she starts to profusely sweat, not knowing what to do when in such a situation. She then walks closer to those men with an envelope in her hand, bowing her head slightly. She speaks softly about not wanting the situation to escalate any further, and to drop it there, to which they reply agitatedly to not be ridiculous after what has happened. She holds out the envelope with a large sum of money visible in it. Both of the parties, those two men and the lady, bow to each other, with those two men accepting the money, deciding to let it go. With those men gone, she holds Kim Jun by his arm, pulling him while supporting him so that he doesn't fall, telling him that he should get his head injury checked. With a confused, blood-smeared face, he asks the lady regarding her identity. With shock, disbelief showing on her face, Kim Jun thinks how that shocked face of hers makes him feel like he's going to die from guilt. While still holding on to Kim Jun, supporting him, she calls out to someone called Assistant Yang to come downstairs to the bar. As they continue walking with his hands on her shoulders, with her supporting him while talking to someone on the phone, Kim Jun thinks to himself how she keeps calling him director, finding it hard to believe he's ever heard being called with such a title before. With a man bigger than the doorframe itself enters through it, saying that he'll be escorting the director, this huge person is Secretary Yang. Holding Kim Jun in his arms in a princess-like holding pose, Assistant Yang walks up the stairs with that lady walking beside him. As they finally come out to the road, it has already started snowing. Standing on one knee, Assistant Yang slowly puts down Kim Jun, saying that he'll take him to the Daewoo General to receive first aid. While he's still thinking if this how a life-flashing-before-your-eyes moment's supposed to be like. With his eyes drifting off to somewhere, Kim Jun notices something. Finally looking at it, the car, he exclaims in surprise, seeing the Mercedes, saying to himself in a way it is audible only to himself about what year this car is even from. He continues on how it brings back memories while the lady holds him hand as tries to get up. With a shocked, completely caught off guard expression on his face, he thinks to himself that he's never driven a car like that before, even though having a car like this has always been his priority, but with his abilities, it was something he couldn't afford. Kneeling by the car's window, he turns back to face those two, while his reflection on the car's window seemed to have a different person's face than Kim Jun's, he says, with a confused look on his face, as to how this car doesn't feel familiar to him. Suddenly noticing something, he quickly turns his head. Shocked on seeing the reflected face on the car's window, he didn't hear when Assistant Yang speaks, saying that the car isn't his, and that Miss Gildot is kind-hearted. Putting his hands on the car's window, he remembers that this face belongs to Jin Hyun-sung. With a slightly frustrated look on his face, he thinks to himself as to why he has his face, while the lady crouches down to him with confusion showing on her face. Thinking back, he remembers about Jin Hyun-sung being caught up in a bar fight and dying. Kim Jun was then studying in the U.S., unable to attend the funeral due to visa issues. Sitting in the back seat of the car beside that lady, with her on his's, looking up with his eyes closed, he asks if today's date is January 5th. He thinks to himself it's just impossible for him to forget the day Hyun-sung died, with the same day being Kim Jun's birthday. With a slightly relieved face, she replies with a yes, asking if he's finally coming to his senses. With eyes looking toward his right, he notices something. With a dead serious look in his eyes, he looks at something. While he continues to look outside the window, he realizes that he has ended up inside the body of his friend who died young. He continues to look outside the car with a slight bit of discomfort showing through his eyes. Standing beside Kim Jun, the lady informs him of the MRI results, indicating no significant damage to be concerned about, but says that it might be best to stay hospitalized for a day, to which he denies, thinking to himself that he needs to be in a quiet place to come to terms with what's been happening. They both hear a person shouting in anger, irritated with what has just happened. Kim Jun recognizes that voice. The person that just shouted is Hyun-sung's father, Chairman Jin Hyun-pil of Daewoo Group. Looking down on Hyun-sung with discontent in his eyes, he reminds him of the mess he has made. Kim Jun, Hyun-sung, looks up at him in surprise. Without turning his head, He looks at the lady asking him what happened, to which she bows her head to reply that fortunately there's no major damage to his brain. This lady is Secretary Kim. With annoyance clearly visible on his face, he reminds her that he just asked what happened, not about Hyun-sung's condition. Worrying that she misunderstood his question, she bows her head down slightly more, apologizing for misunderstanding, and continues that there won't be any issues with the other party, as they've been paid to keep silent. Turning his back towards Hyun-sung while walking towards the door, he reminds them that if it in any way gets to the media, leading to rumors, they'll all face consequences. He leaves, slamming the door shut behind him. Turning to face Kim Jun, now Hyun-sung, she speaks softly, calling him assistant manager, telling him not to take it too hard. Surprised by his calm expression, she thinks to herself about the situation in front of her eyes. Hyun-sung acting totally unbothered and calm by it all, unlike his usual self. Letting out a sigh, Kim Jun realizes the reason why Hyun-sung was always so rebellious, and how he always hated talking about his family. He gets up from the bed, putting his blazer back on, and says that he wants to rest at home and they should just go, to which Secretary Kim, still worried about him, agrees. Finally back in his home, while taking his shirt off, thinking that he can finally sort out his thoughts in peace, suddenly notices his reflection in the cupboard mirror. Looking at his reflection, having fully confirmed that this really is Hyun-sung's face and he's in the year 1998, when Hyun-sung died, taking his shirt off, standing half naked thinking what his actual body is currently doing now, suddenly notices something on his wrist while taking his watch off. It's a tattoo of a chip on the back of his wrist. Suddenly, a notification window pops up in front of him, surprising him. With a login screen showing on the window, he questions himself as to what just popped up in front of him. Putting his hands on it, he realizes that it is Ho-jung's quantum encryption interface due to its outdated design. Not sure if he's right about it after seeing that login interface. He says his username, ID, and password all while looking at it. A window opens up in front of him showing many different files in it. With a surprised look on his face, he realizes that these files contain stored data of blueprints on the advanced weapons developed by ADD until 2024. Shocked, remembering that these files even contain data on essential materials for the manufacturing process, he realizes that he didn't just hit the jackpot, he somehow got the whole casino itself. Remembering how in his previous life Japan had patents on most materials, development of such weapons was near impossible. But now, in 1998, much of the materials needed haven't been patented yet. With a smirk forming on his face, he plans that he'll develop them first and lay a minefield of parents on them. Spreading his arms in ecstasy, he screams out in joy, saying, now that he's the son of a defense industry tycoon, he'll be able to make cutting-edge weapon technology unimaginable in this era. Soon after a second, the head-splitting pain comes back, making him freeze in his tracks in an excruciating headache. Falling to his knees with his body shaking from the pain, he speaks to himself, saying if this is punishment for being too greedy. On all fours, still shaking in pain, calling out to say that he was just kidding with what he said, and that he'll love virtuously while trying to smile through the pain. His iris's color suddenly changed to red. Memories of Hyun-sung flood into his mind, from his childhood to his father ignoring him in annoyance. With a last inaudible cry, he collapsed to the floor. Suddenly, the memory of Secretary Kim comes to his mind, of the day when she joined Hyun-sung as his secretary, with a bright, joyous smile on her face as she introduces herself, Kim Ji-ah. He opens his eyes with the alarm ringing in the background. Supporting himself with one hand, he sits up, rubbing his eyes, realizing that it's already morning. With finally sitting up properly, letting out a sigh, he still finds it difficult wrapping his head around the fact that he has been resurrected in someone else's body, with that person's memory being forcibly implanted. Letting out another sigh, he remembers how he thought that Hyun-sung was just a spoiled chaebol. But after last night's forceful memory implantation, he now knows that Hyun-sung was actually an illegitimate son. With a hint of sadness in his eyes, he thinks to himself of all the problems Hyun-sung has caused, and how, from falling out of a favor, he was demoted to a minor affiliate. With Hyun-sung now just being an assistant manager at a Jaiwoo Group subsidiary which only makes CCTV equipment, Kim Jun realizes how Hyun-sung is now on the verge of being kicked out. Looking towards his cell phone, he says that it's better to properly take care of yesterday's matter by apologizing in person to smooth things over. Holding his phone, he says that maybe he should ask Secretary Kim to arrange a meeting. He suddenly remembers the worried look on her face last night, with tears welling in her eyes. With a blush forming across his face, he thinks to himself she looked worried about him, remembering how bright and joyous when she first greeted him as she became his secretary. He remarks that she was stunningly beautiful. Arriving at the office wanting to meet his father, two receptionists stop him on the way, with one informing him about the chairman's busy schedule, and that meeting him will be difficult while the other one stops him in his tracks thinking that he's back again to cause trouble. Already knowing that this schedule is just an excuse, telling him basically not to come here, he thinks to himself that if this tension were to continue, things will only get harder to resolve. With a bright, gentle smile on his face, he tells the receptionist that he'll just wait for him in his office quietly and meet him when he arrives. Both the women look like Cupid just shot them, from seeing his gentle smile at them. He then walks towards the office with an annoyed look on his face, thinking how cruel this world is where looks are everything, and how he wouldn't have been able to get away like his past self's face, while those two women mutter to themselves that something feels different, surprised seeing Hyun-seung smile so sweetly. Having entered the office, he thinks to himself, though he came to clean up his mess, what should he do now? Remembering the chairman's annoyed face, he thinks if it's be all right if he were to kneel and beg. With a slightly terrified look on his face, he thinks how the chairman, Jin Hyun-pil, wouldn't care if his son's head were to crack as long as the media doesn't find out about it. While just thinking if there's any way for him to gain recognition for business acumen like a proper chaebol heir, his eyes fall on a report about a firepower test. He picks it up and starts turning pages over, reading through the testing to improve the performance of K-1A1 tanks 120 mm APF-SDS rounds, remembering that the period he currently in is when the new Sabo rounds were being developed. Letting out a sigh with disappointment showing on his face, reading on the report how Korea is trying to surpass American depleted uranium rounds with tungsten ones, he remembers how it took them over 30 years to develop penetrator materials resistant to extreme pressure. He then remembers seeing the exact names on some files on the window through the chip on his wrist. With shock being expressed on his face, he realizes that everything's on the ADD data chip. With about an hour left before Chairman Jin arrives here, he decides to seize this opportunity to earn his respect, so he jumps into the seat in front of the computer, assessing through the files in the ADD chip through his wrist chip tattoo. The report that he made gets printed then. One of the receptionists enters, handing him the printed document while apologizing that she should have addressed him more formally if his presence here was work-related, to which he simply tells her to address him however she feels comfortable with. Having handed the print over to Hyun-seung, Chairman Jin opens the door to his office, to which the receptionist bows his head and greets him. Walking towards his chair, Chairman Jin notices Hyun-seung. With an awkward smile, Hyun-seung greets the chairman, saying that he's been waiting to speak with him, to which he tells him to drop the formalities, and what's with him calling him chairman. Walking towards his office, the chairman tells him to come in, to which he complies. Sitting down on his chair lighting a cigarette, he asks him about what's it about and urges him to get to the point. Looking at the chairman, Kim Jun thinks to himself how the chairman doesn't even make eye contact with him, looking completely exhausted to deal with this troublemaker son of his. He thinks to himself that chairman's expectations of Hyun-seung is gone, with excuses meaning nothing now. Kim Jun's face turns sorrowful, realizing that the expression the chairman shows around him, disappointed and annoyed by his presence, is what Hyun-seung always got, making Kim Jun feel bitter as well. Bowing his head in front of the chairman, he apologizes for the commotion he made yesterday. Surprised by his sudden apology, he questions if he even knows what he did wrong. Bowing his head in shame, he agrees, knowing what he did wrong. The chairman suddenly starts scolding him if he knows that why does he keep doing it, getting into fights at clubs while the country's already in a state of chaos with the IMF crisis. He finishes by screaming at him as to how much he's going to tarnish his father's name. Turning his face away from Hyun-seung, he rejects his apology and lets him know that he has lost his last chance. He informs him that his company will soon be removed from the group affiliates and tells him not to use the Jaewoo's name anymore and handle matters on his own while he stands there taking it all in. With worry showing on his face, he knows that being removed from the affiliates essentially means cutting off all ties. Without saying anything further, he just says that he'll accept whatever decision the chairman, his father, makes. But before that, handing over the printed report he made just before the chairman's arrival, he asks for him to review it. He explains that he happened to have an idea for stronger penetrators and put it into that proposal he just handed. Chairman simply replies saying that he has already checked the reports and that further improvements are nearly impossible. Looking up at Hyun-seung in disbelief, he asks if a 20% increase in penetration power is really possible. Confidently, he replies that if given 3 months, he'll have it ready by then. After taking a puff of his cigarette, crushes it on the ashtray, turning his attention towards Hyun-seung, asks him if he understands what it means when he stated it in that report, saying that it's possible to create a tungsten penetrator with over 20% more penetration power than depleted uranium. Brimming with confidence, he remarks how that means turning every existing tank into a rolling block of tofu, and also that it'll drastically reduce production costs. Chairman Jin calmly questions him, asking that he developed such extraordinary material. Without much noticeable change in expressions, he, calling Chairman Jin as father, asks him if he's taking him for a fool, despite being aware that he has a PhD in metallurgical engineering from KAIST. Chairman Jin continues speaking with a hint of suspicion arising in his voice, as to how only a country like Germany has top-tier level of alloy technology, and Hyun-seung, who's been gallivanting overseas under the guise of business trips, suddenly has such an idea. It seems rather suspicious. With a slight hint of discontent showing on his face, he questions his father if he's implying that Hyun-seung stole Germany's technology. Fiercely looking at Hyun-seung, he then says why he can't outright deny it then. Fiercely looking back at his father, mockingly, he asks if his father really thinks he is capable of stealing state-level classified technology. Looking away from Hyun-seung, he denies saying that's not it, while looking at his father, infuriated by the way he denied it so clearly. Hyun-seung confidently tells his father to verify it at the Miletus Research Institute if he's having doubts about its origin being German. Agreeing with his son, he asks for Secretary Choi to come in and fax the documents to Miletus Research Institute. He then tells Secretary Choi to directly inform Director Myung Sung-eun to verify it personally and report back immediately, to which Hyun-seung gave a shocked expression, hearing the name Myung-seung. Slamming his hands on the desk, completely surprised, he asks why Director Myung-seung is at Miletus. His father speaks if he's finally gone mad. He reminds him how he dragged Myung-seung himself 3 years ago. His father then makes a light comment if he's worried of his teacher checking on him, completely ignoring him. Kim Jun thinks to himself that Professor Myung-seung was his and Hyun-seung's teacher during their KAIST days. He then continues how Professor Myung-seung dedicated his life to university research until the day he passed away. That was his past life. But in this life of his, Professor Myung-seung is the director of Miletus Research Institute. This isn't the future that Kim Jun knew of. As he's thinking that, suddenly more memories come flooding in. In those memories, he sees Hyun-seung along with Secretary Kim beside him, with Hyun-seung kneeling in front of Professor Myung-seung as if he's begging him for something, and the professor finally agrees to him. Kim Jun, after the memory flooding his mind, realizes that Hyun-seung recruited Professor Myung to build his foundation at Miletus. But now the history has been altered. Suddenly, Secretary Choi calls the chairman informing him of the call from Director Myung-seung. Chairman Jin picks it up and talks normally at first, then shows a bit of concern on his face as he talks. With a bit of drool flowing out of mouth, he continues to talk with the director, repeating the director's words, how it's a completely new approach, and also how he's never seen anything like it before. With the director asking who actually developed such a thing, he mysteriously replies to not ask that just yet, as he continues to drool in contentment with a huge smile forming on his face. He suddenly realizes that Hyun-seung is still standing there in front of him, and says that he'll call back later and cuts off the call. Embarrassed by him earlier, he coughs a bit after putting his phone down. Chairman then looks up at Hyun-seung asking him what he wants in return for showing off such a big card, or if he wants to return to Miletus. Hearing that, his eyes start to sparkle, thinking how he hadn't considered it this far ahead. Trying to maintain his authority in this deal, the chairman offers him the position of a purchasing team leader, and nothing higher than that. Hyun-seung cuts the chairman off in between his words, telling him he wants the position of the development team leader. Looking up at Hyun-seung in surprise, he asks him if he even knows the weight of the position he's asking for. With a serious look on his face, he asks Hyun-seung why he's asking for the position of the development team leader, while he tells him how he can have more chances to pocket something if he chooses to be the purchasing team leader. Gritting his teeth, Hyun-seung says that if money were the case, he'd have sold it somewhere else. Tauntingly, he says how Lick Nexwin would have paid better than here at Jaewoo. Infuriated with the taunt, he doesn't say anything and just looks at Hyun-seung. Without saying anything further, the chairman just tells him to go back and wait for the news after he's done discussing it with the executives. Hyun-seung tiredly complies with him, realizing that maybe the development team leader position was a long shot. As he's about to take his leave, suddenly the door opens up with a person announcing that he's here, calling the chairman his father. A sturdy-looking person enters the chairman's office, speaking how he could even hear it from the outside, continuing if Hyun-seung is returning to Miletus. Seeing him enter, Hyun-seung turns to face that man. He then greets him with an awkward smile, calling brother. This person is executive director of Miletus, Jin Hyun-chil. Jin Hyun-chil is his half-brother with a different mother. Speaking from the perspective of Kim Jun, he says how Hyun-chil sees Hyun-seung as a thorn in his side. With a smile on his face, Hyun-chil pats his brother's back heavily, making him be pushed forward a bit. He then says how fortunate it is to have Hyun-chil return right when they were struggling to find capable talent. Bowing his head to his father while looking at his brother, he asks to be pardoned. While going back to the door, he locks eyes with his brother but keeps walking without saying any more. With a huge grin visible on his face, he walks towards the room thinking about how things are about to get fun. Hyun-sung sits back on his chair, reading a book. Secretary Kim puts a pile of documents on his desk. She then tells him about the position of Jae-woo being the 27th in the business rankings. Without paying much attention to her, he clarifies it by saying that it isn't because of Jae-woo's growth, but because of the unprecedented economic crisis forcing other companies to crisis. He thinks to himself how he just wanted to get a sense of the business landscape before returning to Miletus. But reviewing the statements of the entire group isn't something that one can just breeze through like a neighborhood market. He suddenly then notices Secretary Kim still there and asks her why she isn't leaving. Rolling up her sleeve, she replies with a joyous smile that she can't just leave while the assistant manager is still working. Without saying anything, he just looks at her, letting out a sigh of contentment. Seeing her so eager to help, he asks her to focus on summarizing the defense affiliates for him and to put aside anything related to Jae-woo construction or distribution. She then picks and hands him a file related to Jae-woo Daeon. Thinking to himself, he describes Jae-woo Daeon as one of the 3 major affiliates of the Jae-woo Group, specializing in developing armored vehicles like tanks and self-propelled artillery. She then hands him a file related to Cosmos Euro, originally established for fighter jet maintenance, but having accumulated enough technical prowess, it can now produce aircraft engines even in his era. It holds a key to developing South Korea's 4.5 the generation fighter jets. He then thinks about how the Nuriho space program always gets his heart racing. She then hands him the last file. It's on Jae-woo Miletus. Taking the file from her hands, he thinks that this is the company he needs to take control of, and that security Miletus means having both Cosmos Euro and Daeon fall into his grasp. As known to the general public, Miletus is just an unknown defense contractor that makes shells, but in reality, Miletus is the core and holding company of the Jae-woo Group. Miletus is the foundational industry, being the axis of weapon production, encompassing Cosmos Euro and Daeon because its materials, chemistry, munitions manufacturing pipeline is an unparalleled growth driver for weapons. Surprised by the report in the paper, she relays to Hyun-sung saying that the Miletus's revenue is higher in comparison to the other. Replying to her, he says that it's pretty obvious as to how without materials, weapon production is impossible, and also that weapon materials have astronomical added value. She then asks if that's the reason why Hyun-sung insisted on Miletus, while she says that she thought that it was because it's a lesser-known company, easier to plant parachute executives. Without reacting much to her last comment, Hyun-sung comments on why the R&D budget of Miletus seems to be in a bad shape while reading the file. Suddenly a phone rings, which Secretary Kim answers, telling Hyun-sung to wait. Turning to face Hyun-sung after the call, with a really happy face, she informs him that starting from tomorrow, he's to directly report to Miletus development team and team leader. With a small grin forming on his face, he mutters saying that he shouldn't be laughing, knowing that he's on a rough ride. With the grin getting wider, he thinks to himself that things are about to get interesting, and the beginning of a legend is about to begin. Sitting in the back seat of the car, he thinks about how it's already been a month since he took charge of the development team, and how smoothly the development of the new armor-piercing shell is progressing. He continues as to how he'd have gained Chairman Jin's trust once the development is complete, and they finally move on to the mass production stage. Thinking of the future, he says as to how even that won't be enough. With a determined look in his eyes, he decides to solidify his position to the point where he can lead the development of new weapons in the future. And to achieve that, he thinks to himself that for it to happen, he's going to need a weapon ahead of its time. Busy thinking, he says it out loud that he needs something like a smart shell. Assistant Yang, as he drives, asks him if he said something, to which he simply just replies, saying that he was just talking to himself. Thinking if he could just develop something like a smart shell in this era, then the neighboring countries, and not just North Korea, within range of their self-propelled and naval guns, wouldn't even dream of military provocations. With a serious glint in his eyes, he's determined to make it happen with his own hands. Looking at Hyun-sung through the rear-view mirror inside the car, Assistant Yang lightly smiles. Noticing him, Hyun-sung asks him why he's sneaking glances in the rear-view mirror. He smilingly apologizes, saying that it's just that Hyun-sung's deep-in-thought expression caught his attention, hearing that Hyun-sung thinks to himself that Assistant Yang surely has a sharp eye. Going through Hyun-sung's memories, he remembers that Assistant Yang used to be a judo athlete, one with the skill to have made it to the national team, but now due to Hyun-sung's big-heartedness, these two are not connected. Kim Jun then speaks of how they met by chance in a hospital hallway, while Assistant Yang was despairing over his mother's surgery costs, and despite being complete strangers, Hyun-sung paid the full cost of the surgery, starting their connection. After that, he insisted on repaying him by working as his assistant. Looking at Assistant Yang, Hyun-sung asks if he regrets it, giving up his athlete career. Without any further thinking, he simply disagrees, continuing that if it weren't for the team leader, his mother would have passed away long ago. With a smile on his face, Hyun-seung says that they're even now considering all the trouble Hyun-seung caused him, and that he can also quit whenever he wants. Looking at Hyun-seung through the rear-view mirror, smiling, Assistant Yang says that he'll work until retirement and leave with a solid severance package, and if he were to fire him any time before that, then it'll be unlawful dismissal. Letting out a small chuckle, Hyun-seung says that chatting all the way to the research center made this trip feel shorter, to which Assistant Yang graciously agrees, with the car finally coming to a halt. They've now arrived at the Miletus Research Center, located right at the foot of a mountain. Walking into the building, Hyun-seung, looking somewhere, stands there. He then notices a person standing outside on a large balcony. He calls this person Professor and calls out to him this person is Professor Myung-seung. Making a light comment to him, he enters the balcony, asking him if he's still a heavy drinker, while thinking how this is the first time he's meeting his professor after gaining this body. Turning back facing Hyun-seung, he replies back with a grin as to how that's a habit that won't go away, and after Hyun-seung stopped drinking with him, he just drinks all by himself now. With a caring expression on his face, he says that it's about time for him to stop drinking and start thinking about his health. With an unnoticeable, sorrowful expression on his face, he thinks of how 10 years from now his mentor will pass away from liver cirrhosis. Professor simply just says that everyone dies with time. Changing the topic, Hyun-seung asks how's Jia doing. Professor replies with that she's doing great, proudly adding that after all she's his assistant, hearing that he just awkwardly laughs a little. Thinking back of the day when he found out about the relationship between Secretary Kim and the professor being first cousins, commenting on it while thinking to himself, it is like the Beauty and the Beast. Suddenly Professor turns a bit serious, telling him to watch himself. Seeing his scary, serious face, he flinches, saying that he wouldn't dare to. Letting out a loud laugh, he says how nice it is to joke around his pupil again. Commenting on the professor's behavior, Hyun-seung asks if the alloying process for the armor-piercing shells is going smoothly, seeing how relaxed he looks, to which the professor replies with that it surely is going very smoothly. He continues by praising how no other research facility in the world has as diverse a set of material processing equipment as Miletus, and with all the necessary equipment here, there's no issue. Looking up at the sky, he says that it should be ready for trial production by next month. Suddenly remembering something, he says that there is just one issue. It's that the muzzle pressure keeps dropping when firing new shells. Awkwardly smiling, Hyun-seung says that it's because the shape of the new shell that alters the instantaneous pressure within the barrel, thinking back that this is the exact same issue he struggled with in his previous life. Turning his face towards Prof A, he notices Prof Myung's jaw dropped in shock on not realizing that earlier. Prof A gets annoyed and yells for not realizing that issue sooner before and had to learn about it from his pupil. Looking a bit embarrassed, Prof A tells Hyun-seung that he's still better suited to be a researcher than a businessman. Continuing how he used to tell him this and that, Hyun-seung interrupts him, saying that he doesn't recall him saying that. Prof Ad then says if it was June, he told that to instead of him, he was surprised on finally hearing his name. The Prof Ad goes on asking about what happened to him and why hasn't he been in touch, and if Hyun-seung has heard anything about him. Looking away in sadness, letting out a breath as snow starts to fall, he says that he's still looking for him. He then looks up at the sky and says that even after all that he's tried to do to find Kim Jun, there's still no news of him yet. With a bright smile on her face, shining brightly, Secretary Kim asks Hyun-seung if he wants coffee. Covering his eyes from the sudden increase in light intensity, he asks, did something good happen that she's looking so cheerful right now? Holding a square-shaped thin box in front of her, she commends on how he's always so sharp. That square-shaped thin box has a CD in it and test-firing #20 written on it. Letting out a sigh, he thinks if it's already been a month, and then he asks that they should take a look at it. While Secretary Kim sits down and does the work, Hyun-seung thinks to himself that having already seen it in his past life, he isn't much excited about it. Secretary Kim stands beside Hyun-seung as they watch it. Secretary Kim says how they tested it on the K-1 tank's armor following her. He says that it's a domestically developed tank, but based on the design of American M1 Abrams. With the TV screen reflecting on his eyes, he says confidently that if that tank gets penetrated, then every existing tank can be penetrated. Following a large explosion, Secretary Kim asks Hyun-seung if they succeeded, and that it was very quick for her to follow with its movement. Shaking in happiness, Hyun-seung mentions that from now on people are going to call it the Grim Reaper. After seeing the video, he tells Secretary Kim to go and report to the chairman about the success, to which she replies that Director Myung-seung has already reported on that. He then tells her that the chairman will soon push the military for mass production and that they should get the presentation materials ready for them. Secretary Kim receives a call and just takes it. With a cheerful smile on her face, Holding the phone next to her ear, she informs Hyun-sung that the chairman is summoning him. Lightly slamming his hands on his desk, he cries out how they can't let him even rest for a moment, and that the chairman surely called him just to tell him to hurry with the mass production meeting preparation. Holding his tie, tightening it till it looks firm, Secretary Kim says that he's summoned to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, not the headquarters. Looking up at Hyun-sung, she gently says, "Aren't they inviting him for lunch?" While he, blushingly, looks at Secretary Kim, who's currently smoothing down his blazer. Seeing her care for him like that, he starts blushing really hard, standing there speechless in front of her. They both finally reach the hotel, finding a person waiting for them. They approach him and he bows, greeting him and telling them to follow him to the private room. Arriving at the private room, the person with them opens the door, standing at the doorstep along with them. He then informs the chairman of the arrival of the second young master. Hyun-sung then notices the group's executives and realizes that maybe it wasn't just for a meal. After coming in, he goes and sits beside his father, asking him if there is a problem suddenly. He disagrees with him, saying that there is no problem, and that he just wanted to have lunch with him, while Secretary Kim sits on a couch in that room, exchanging greetings with another person sitting beside her. Holding a cup in his hands, he compliments on how the report exceeded his expectations. With the cup near his mouth, showing an unnoticeable pride on his face, he says watching the test footage made him feel like awarding the guys who knocked some sense into him, and maybe that those guys were responsible for his change of heart. Glancing at his father while he takes up a cup to his mouth, noticing that pride showing on his face, he thinks to himself that he's still his father even after everything. He relays to Hyun-sung with a small smile that he has already authorized bonus payment to the research team, and then asks him if there's something he wants. Suddenly looking filled with greed, with a bit of drool falling down from his mouth, he thinks to himself that he indeed has something he wants. His father repeats it again while sipping on his drink, asking him to speak up if he wants anything, to which Hyun-sung, without letting his father finish his sentence, says that he wants his father to pay him the licensing fees for the new armor-piercing rounds. Surprised by his demand, his father slightly opens one eye with the other still closed. Making a sign of money with his hands, he says he means royalties. He continues speaking that Miletus profited from his developments, and so royalties are owed. His father speaks calmly, saying that they're even as he's buying him lunch, quoting, "Family doesn't do that." Irritated by his father's calm behavior, he shoutingly says that he's not eating it then. He follows with saying that there are things that he's been wanting to buy lately. With a hand on his chin, his father says that he'll now have to sell his new yacht before even using it, commenting on how they said that one can't deny his bloodline. Joyed by it, he takes a bite of the food on the table, commenting how at times like this flaunting a yacht will get him bashed. His father talks back lightly, saying if Hyun-sung is really one to talk. Without arguing further, he says that his wisdom allows him to offer sound advice. Finally giving in, his father says that he'll consider the royalties. Secretary Kim looks at them bickering with a warm smile on her face. Placing a file on the table regarding the mass production, he says that this is the main reason for him calling him here. He reads the heading of the file and asks him if he has already submitted it to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He reads the file, thoroughly flipping through the pages. His father then goes on about how the development of the new armor-piercing rounds was a project the Army was constantly hounding them about. And with the data in place, he hurriedly submitted it. He continues speaking that surprisingly they're holding the production meeting today. Surprised by their actions, he asks him in disbelief that they're holding the meeting a day after receiving the report. His father then says that hearing that surprised him too, realizing that's just how eagerly they were waiting for the news of it, and that they'll inform them of the production quantity right after the meeting is complete. He then says that right after the meeting, the details will remain confidential until the presidential briefing, but he has a friend in the 7th Mobile Corps, and that his friend will let him know in advance. Hearing the name of the 7th Mobile Corps, he says that they'll be the ones to benefit the most from the new rounds. He then asks his father about how many he thinks they'll order. His father then replies that considering reserves for wartime, they might order at least 100,000 rounds, to which Hyun-sung says that it's about 20 billion won in sales. Holding up the chopsticks, his father says that profit margins matter more than the sales. Chairman Jin says that if his estimation is correct, then it's about 4.5 billion won in profit. Hyun-sung says that since it's specialized ammunition, the margin should be 30%, closer to 6 billion won in profit. With a smirk forming up on his face, Chairman Jin looks at Hyun-sung after he made an estimation of 6 billion won, to which he says that with added material values, it's achievable. Hyun-sung continues speaking. Getting to his point, he says that adding that 6 billion to the payment for previous deliveries, Miletus will be able to independently fund advanced weapon development without any military support. In hopes for his father to catch his hint, his father does, and asks him that he sounds like he has something else up his sleeve. As he was just about to speak, someone's phone started ringing, pausing him. Apologizing for the sudden call, the executive hurriedly tries to take it out of his pocket, which makes Hyun-sung think that his company seems to have bigger issues than weapon development. With a little bit of worry showing on his face, the executive informs the chairman that it's a call from Lieutenant General Kim Tae-ik of the 7th Mobile Corps, which the chairman tells him to answer. The executive then picks up the call and talks with the lieutenant general, repeating whatever he asks him about. He then gets to ask them about how many will they order. While he's profusely sweating from the pressure, after hearing the quantity of their order, he acts surprised in disbelief. Having realized that something wasn't right, Chairman Jin lets out a sigh as if he had somewhat expected this outcome too. Judging from the voice of the executive, he asks him while sipping on his drink if it's bad news. He then asks him of the situation with the phone call. The executive relays the details of the phone call about them planning to purchase about 7,000 rounds a year. He then says that the lieutenant general was too taken aback by their decision and apologizes for the unexpected outcome. Chairman Jin suddenly gets up from his chair, while Hyun-sung thinks about why they decided on it like that when they were so insistent on it. He then walks away from the table, calling the Joint Chiefs, informing them about the military's decision. As he returns taking his seat, Hyun-sung asks him about what they said. His father replies saying that claimed budget cuts due to the economic crisis, irritatingly adding that they're all lies. Hearing that, he asks his father if he's suspecting anything, to which his father says about how next year there is a major defense project unrelated to them, the Jaiwoo Group. He then says that if they overspend on the armor-piercing rounds now, then their budget next year will be reduced. Hyun-sung says that explains why they slashed their project instead. Secretary Kim listens to them speak with a bit of worry showing on her face. Hyun-sung then asks his father about the scale of next year's project. Irritatedly, he replies that it's 2 trillion won. Hyun-sung thinks to himself that it's a rare opportunity for the old guard at the Joint Chiefs. 2 trillion against 200 billion. The kickbacks must be tenfold or so. He continues how their budget will experience a downfall if they were to blow this year's budget on them. He asks his father about how much they were planning to give them. His father irritatedly says that they weren't planning to give them anything at all. His father, with a serious face, says that he doesn't run a business through bribery and he never will. Looking at his father, he smiles warmly at him, thinking to himself that the lack of bribery was why they're acting up like this, and praises his father in his head for not getting involved in bribery and stuff, feeling proud of his father. Hyun-sung sees his father in a totally new light, thinking that he might actually be a quiet, decent person, while his father just sits on his chair feeling proud of himself for never getting involved in bribery. Chairman Jin then gets off his seat, telling Hyun-sung that this is totally political and not to worry too much. Putting his hand on his shoulder, he tells him that business has its losses, and not to be disheartened by it. Chairman Jin then starts to walk towards the door. He suddenly stops in his tracks with Hyun-sung calling him, telling him that they've yet to suffer any loss. Turning to face Hyun-sung, he lets out a sigh, saying that at 7,000 rounds a year, they'd have to produce at a loss, and they also can't refuse given the nature of the business and how the defense industry can't always solely focus on the company's profits. Hyun-sung gets off his chair and asks his father about why don't they sell it to others, to which his father replies that their project is for the army so naturally, to which he gets interrupted. Hyun-sung then says that they can explore the alternatives after they backstabbed them, right after demanding them to act. With a slightly worried look on his face, he looks at Hyun-sung, brimming with confidence from every pore of his existence. He says that if his father supports him with just one thing, then he'll take the responsibility for selling them. Both father and son are walking up the stairs to the UN command office. With his hands inside the pocket of his jacket, he asks Hyun-sung if it's surely worth giving a shot to see if the U.S. military will buy their armor-piercing shells. Hyun-sung tells him how the U.S. has the Foreign Comparative Testing Program, FCT, for Allied weapon acquisitions. He then mysteriously says as to how the U.S. desperately needs their armor-piercing shells. Letting out a sigh, looking at the ground, he says, "Why would the U.S. need their weapons when they've never purchased anything from them?" Continuing to sigh, he says hoping that this won't ruin his relationship with the commander, mentioning how hard he worked to build this current rapport. Hyun-sung says that the U.S. never purchased anything from them because the Korean weapons never exactly met their standards, but their armor-piercing shells are on a totally different league, by saying that he hopes to reassure his father. He agrees to that. While gritting his teeth in anger, he says that selling something that could advance Korea's armored forces by 20 years or so to the U.S. military. He then remarks as to how desperate the Joint Chief of Staff must be to like that. Hyun-sung laughs and calls his father a patriot for worrying more about the country than the company making a profit. Chairman Jin walks ahead of him, calling him a fool, saying that he'll understand when he gets to his age. His father continues to speak, saying that it's not about patriotism or anything noble like that. It's about the country where he was born and raised. He tells him that as he gets older, that sort of sentiment starts to take root. Not saying anything back, Hyun-seung thinks to himself, saying that he understands it all too well, as he used to be an individualistic scientist who didn't feel the slightest value in patriotism. Remembering his bloody dead body, he continues to speak as to how because of that irrational impulse he even gave his life for it. He then reassures his father to not worry about the military by saying that if this deal succeeds, then the Joint Chiefs will restore the order volume. He questions confusedly as to how exporting will make the Joint Chiefs restore the order, to which Hyun-seung replies that he'll find out in due time. He then asks his father to grant him the full authority over this matter, and that he'll surely make it happen, not only exporting to the U.S. military, but also deciding new armor-piercing rounds for Korea too. With a grin on his face, he tells Hyun-seung to do whatever he wants, and that his judgment is his father's judgment. This is the office of Commander of the ROK U.S. Forces Command. General Hummer greets Chairman Jin, with Chairman Jin reminding him of the last time they met was during the foundational ceremony. Looking at Hyun-seung, the commander asks Chairman Jin if he's his second son, to which he replies, saying that Hyun-seung's the one he mentioned in the call. Putting his hand forward for a handshake, Hyun-seung introduces himself as the team leader of the Jaiwoo development team. Ignoring his attempt to shake hands, the commander turns away and tells him to just get down to business. Looking back towards his father, Hyun-seung thinks to himself, after seeing the commander's behavior, that his meeting was set up quite reluctantly. Sitting on his chair, he asks Hyun-seung what it is that he wants to ask him. Confidently walking forward, he says that it's not a request but a proposal. Being precise, he says that he's offering him an opportunity. The commander then glances at Hyun-seung, telling him to proceed with what he has. Handing him a file, he asks him to take a look at it first, and that if it pleases him, then he'd like for his recommendation letter for submission to the FCT. Reading through it, he asks if he wants to proceed with the U.S. Department of Defense acquisition program, to which Hyun-seung replies that the APFSDS, armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot, they've developed this time, is quite effective. Letting out a sigh, he tells him that he should have done his homework before coming here about the U.S. military already having the world's best armor-piercing shells. He then states the facts as to why they would buy their more expensive composite alloy shells over USA's highly functional low-cost uranium shells. Hyun-seung just looks at him speaking. The commander then says that confidence is good, but he should first learn the basics of business. With a huge grin, he agrees with the point the commander is trying to make. With the commander getting up to leave while telling him to wrap it up now, he gets interrupted by Hyun-seung telling him that since he's taken the time to be present here in front of him, why doesn't he just watch one video with him before he leaves? Irritatedly, he asks if he didn't make himself clear with what he just said. Ignoring his words, Hyun-seung has already put the CD in the player, and he's now about to play it. He just sits back down on his chair while sighing. With the video started, the commander sees an obliquely placed thick metal. He thinks to himself, if this is an oblique penetrations test, then remarks to himself that the angle looks like something their shells can barely pierce. With Hyun-seung standing there beside the TV, the commander continues to think to himself that, at that angle and thickness, it's impossible for foreign technology to penetrate it, and how it's a setup that only US-made shells can succeed at, with much lower real-world penetration capability, and at best it'll just make a tiny hole in it. With a grumpy look on his face, he thinks to himself that even just making a tiny hole would be an incredible achievement for a Korean company. He suddenly jolts at the sudden loud noise from the TV. He stands up from his chair, surprised to see how big of a hole their armor-piercing shell just made. He grabs the files in surprise, which he just left without properly reading through. He finds himself shocked and speechless from what he just saw on the TV. Hyun-seung turns to face the commander and tells him that it's a product with 20% higher penetration than the U.S. military's depleted uranium shells. With realization hitting him hard, he thinks to himself that with 20% higher penetration would render every armor in the world useless. He then questions what he just saw, if it is even possible with a mere tungsten shell. With a huge confident grin on his face, Hyun-seung says that, as he earlier said, he's offering the U.S. an opportunity, and a pretty big one at that. Calming himself down, the commander asks why he's aiming to supply it to the U.S. military. With a smile, he says that it's because the U.S. is the country that needs it the most. He then continues saying how the U.S. is currently struggling with the radioactive leakage issues of depleted uranium shells, and in such a scenario, a tungsten shell that outperforms uranium shells and is easier to store and use would naturally attract attention. He also mentions hearing about U.S. making efforts to develop similar shells. Sitting back in his chair, finally defeated in this game of wits and knowledge, he asks Hyun-seung as to how did he even learn that the U.S. were developing new armor-piercing shells. Hyun-seung simply states that this level of information gathering is standard for a defense contractor, to which the commander refutes by saying how cautious they were, even with material import to prevent leaks. As they both continue to speak, Chairman Jin stands there looking at his son. Speaking like a mastermind, Hyun-seung says that the movement of special metal materials used exclusively for weapons on the international market cannot be concealed. Rolling his head back while sitting on his chair, finally given up on arguing with Hyun-seung, he concedes and tells him how the U.S. tried to develop new armor-piercing shells, but abandoned the attempt due to high costs. Speaking up, Hyun-seung mentions that's why he said that he's offering an opportunity to the U.S. He then says that they'll supply at the same price as uranium shells. Without thinking further, Hyun-seung gets to explaining that they succeeded in minimizing the costly tungsten ratio, and substituting it with a new composite alloy, making this breakthrough allow them to significantly reduce costs. Suddenly, he notices the commander dropped jaw and realizes that maybe he said a bit too much. The commander then screams in disbelief on hearing that, asking him if that is really that cheap, to which Hyun-seung says that, correcting himself, that it's not cheap but affordable, only for the U.S. military. Putting his signature on his handwritten recommendation letter, the commander hands it to Hyun-seung and tells him to attach it to the front of the documents, and it'll be directly delivered to the highest decision-makers. Grinning happily, he thinks to himself that they finally did it. A recommendation letter from one of the top 10 U.S. power figures, the commander of U.S. Forces Korea. Commander Hummer then suddenly calls out to Hyun-seung respectfully as team leader Jin Hyun-seung, to which he responds. The commander says that now he understands what Hyun-seung meant by saying that he's offering an opportunity. He happily places his hand forward for a handshake with Hyun-seung while he thanks him, seeing that Hyun-seung gets delighted on finally having made the deal and earning the commander's respect. He then finally grabs the commander's hand and shakes it, marking the beginning of their official business with the U.S. military, while Chairman Jin stands and watches from the sidelines at the achievement of his son. With a smile full of pride and warmth for his son, he smiles looking at him. 10 days later, in his office, Hyun-seung is on a call with Lieutenant General Michael, former head of the U.S. Army Weapons Acquisition Planning Division. Lieutenant General Michael says that he has reviewed all the documents and praises Hyun-seung for developing such an excellent armor-piercing round. He then says that there were a couple of questions he had after reading the test reports, to which Hyun-seung replies to let him know whatever questions he has, to which the Lieutenant General says that if he'd like, he'll send him plenty of samples and that he can try them out with the Abrams tank. Lieutenant General then asks him if he'd do that for them, to which Hyun-seung sappily agrees. With a pen in his mouth while on phone with Hyun-seung, he says, that way he can better assess the pros and cons directly. Then the U.S. military will handle the relevant procedures on their end. 10 days later, while on call with Hyun-seung, screaming into the phone, shocked at the results, asks how did he even create such a monster. Reading through papers while he's on call with the Lieutenant General, he says after hearing him scream in shock, he says that it seems he's quite satisfied with the results, to which the Lieutenant General remarks as to how this has turned the army upside down. With a serious glint visible in his eye, he asks Hyun-seung how many he can produce annually. With a way too serious face, throwing aside the papers he was reading through, he answers that they can supply 100,000 rounds annually. Hyun-seung knows that 100,000 rounds is a bit of a stretch, but he needs to oversell to aim high and have some room to adjust. With Lieutenant General suddenly agreeing with the amount, Hyun-seung regrets what he just said. The lieutenant continues speaking, saying that for now they should push forward with a 5-year contract for quantity. Lieutenant General informs him that a representative from the U.S. Forces Korea will visit with the necessary documents tomorrow, and reminds him again to make sure to have 100,000 rounds ready every year. Hearing all that, Hyun-seung starts to sweat, realizing that he's really screwed. His jaw dropped in shock from hearing that America contracted them for 100,000 rounds annually for 5 years, which is about 200 billion won in annual revenue, and the total revenue over 5 years would be around 1 trillion won. The chairman then walks up to Hyun-seung, grabbing his shoulder, praising him, saying that if it weren't for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he'd have thrown a party by now. With an annoyed look on his face, he asks his father about what they are complaining about now. Walking forward, he mentions how they contacted them a few days ago, pressuring them to prioritize their supply. Chairman Jin then remarks about how the Joint Chiefs of Staff are worried about losing face if the U.S. takes it first, a superior weapon developed by a private company. Hyun-seung then mentions that prioritizing delivery to USA, the initial contactor, is only natural, and that their maximum production capacity being 100,000 per year. So if they were to prioritize even 7,000 rounds for the Korean military, then it'll lead to delay in the U.S. shipment. The chairman then says that this time he won't give in to their unreasonable demands, and that he'll handle the Joint Chiefs properly this time. With a grin on his face, Hyun-sung confidently asks his father to let him do it, saying that he'll make sure they never pull such stunts again, and even give them more than they deserve. Worried by his confidence and with what he just said, Chairman Jin asks him about what he's planning to do now. He reassures his father, telling him not to worry as he already has a plan ready for it. Surprised after hearing his plan, he asks him since when did he start thinking this way. With mischief brimming brightly in his eyes, he says that all of the Joint Chiefs' antics were all accounted for in his plan. Hyun-sung is currently on a call with reports ready to implement his plan in motion. Secretary Kim is also helping him out on his matter, calling many different TV stations, news channels, telling them that she just wants to share some good news from Miletus. A news channel starts broadcasting about Jaewoo Miletus's newly developed armor-piercing round that is set to be exported to the U.S. Army, with another piece of news that says that the Korean military's total order was just around 7,000 units, mysteriously reducing the originally planned 100,000 units. Another news channel talks about how U.S., the initial contactor, will get the priority, and how the Korean military might not even secure anything for the next 5 years, and how incredible the performance of this armor-piercing rounds is, and if Korea loses all of it to U.S., it'd be like giving up on 20 years of advanced armored capabilities. Another news channel reporting on the rumors of internal conflict within the Joint Chiefs of Staff are widespread, and how a superior weapon developed domestically is being overlooked while another country claims it. Hyun-sung stands in front of the TV seeing how everything is going smoothly. Secretary Kim suddenly calls Hyun-sung, to which he responds. She informs him, while trembling in worry, that the chairman is summoning him, to which he acts delighted, saying that the time has come. Entering the room, Hyun-sung notices something. With Hyun-sung still standing at the doorstep to the chairman's office, the chairman tells him to greet the guests first, giving out their identity that they're the representatives from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Heeding his father's command, he bows his head and greets their guests, introducing himself while suddenly a person stands up and about the mess he has created. With his one eye closed, he respectfully asks what that person means by saying that while thinking to himself that this old man, who just stood up to scold him, surely has guts. He then glances at the old man's uniform and notices that this old man's name is Han Dong-hoon. He has 4 stars, and that this guy is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The old man starts to speak loudly, telling him if he's pretending not to know, and as to how the military is in chaos over this U.S. export issue. Mockingly, Hyun-sung says that in these IMF times they're bringing him massive foreign currency, and if this is something they deserve criticism for. Furiously, he also mentions that they are a profit-seeking company, and if they were just supposed to settle for production levels that don't even cover their development costs. Feeling threatened by Hyun-sung's words, Han Dong-hoon asks him if he's trying to pick a fight with him. Han Dong-hoon calms himself before things get out of hand. He then informs them that the president himself has issued a special order to restore the original order quantity. He then says if that is satisfactory now, and asks if there are still any problems. To which Hyun-sung lets out a sky smile, thinking to himself that this guy, Han Dong-hoon, still doesn't get it and acts like he's doing him a favor. Han Dong-hoon then demands them to be ready to sign the contract right away, to which he suddenly stops in between before speaking further as he notices something. With a grin on his face, Hyun-sung informs them that there is no supply available for the Korean military, saying that they're barely able to fulfill the U.S. orders as it is. Finally knowing his position, Han Dong-hoon, while shaking in shame, asks Hyun-sung to please consider their situation, as well as the president personally has gotten involved, so rejecting the offer now would make him look bad. Hyun-sung knew it too that Han Dong-hoon isn't worried about the president's image, but his own head. Hearing his pleas, Hyun-sung says that it surely is a difficult situation. Another officer looks at how Han Dong-hoon is behaving obediently in front of Hyun-sung, makes him think that this young man, Jin Hyun-sung, is really something for making Han Dong-hoon behave so obediently like that. Hyun-sung then gives him a sudden hope, saying that it's not like there's no way at all. Hearing that, Han Dong-hoon stands up in joy and tells him that he'll support it as much as he can. Hyun-sung then says that the issue right now is the production lines, and how building a factory isn't feasible in the short term, so the fastest solution to this crisis would be to convert the high-explosive shell production lines to armor-piercing rounds. He then mentions how converting the factory setup would require a huge investment, and to recover those costs, they'd need an additional 20,000 rounds annually. On hearing all those things, utter worry comes to his mind. Han Dong-hoon then asks him about how much longer he's planning to make him accept it all. Hardly caring about his state, Hyun-sung says that for at least 3 years, he'll have to purchase a total of 160,000 rounds. With glints of mischief visible in his eyes, remembering how Dong-hoon was trying to line his own pocket with power, he decides that he'll shamelessly suck everything out of him. Putting his head down in shame, having no other choice left, he agrees to Hyun-seung's terms and conditions. After agreeing to it, while shaking in fury and shame, Han Dong-hoon thinks to himself that to cover 160,000 rounds, he'll have to pull next year's defense enhancement budget, realizing that all the kickbacks are gone. Seething from anger and drowned in shame, he says that they should just end it. He then walks out of the office without looking back. Hyun-seung bows to him and leaves, followed by another officer from behind. A person suddenly calls out to him, saying that he's quite different from what he heard from rumors. Putting out his hand to shake hands with Hyun-seung, he introduces himself that he's Kim Tae-ik, commander of 7th Mobile Corps. Without saying anything much, he offers him to have a meal together sometime whenever he's free to. Remembering that this man is the one who first informed them of the amount the Korean military first decided to order. Hyun-seung then shakes hands with him, after which Kim Tae-ik remarks that he's quite different from what he expected. Hyun-seung curiously asks what type of rumor did he hear about himself. He then starts mentioning all his past mistakes and how his behavior was used to. Hearing all that, Hyun-seung suddenly apologizes, saying that he'll love righteously from now on. Patting his shoulder, Tae-ik says that he was just joking about it, and then he finally says that he has something he wants to ask, to which Hyun-seung tells him to proceed. Tae-ik asks Hyun-seung why he's going to such lengths to ensure that the Korean military ends up securing these new armor-piercing rounds. Even though his side already stands to gain from the U.S. contract, there's no loss for them. Hyun-seung replies that a businessman doesn't need a reason to sell more. With a serious look in his eyes, Tae-ik asks him if that is really it. Letting out a sigh, he tells Tae-ik that if he wants to hear his true intentions, then he'll be honest with him. He says that in modern times they can no longer protect the country with half-hearted patriotism. They'll need military power that can physically overwhelm the enemy. He continues with how in modern warfare science and technology determine victory. Military power means developing and stockpiling superior weapons, and that if the military neglects that, then he himself will force a change. Tae-ik stops Hyun-seung before he speaks any further. Tae-ik says that he's quite bold and thanks him for his honesty. Walking out through the door, he tells him that they should talk again sometime, away from prying eyes, maybe over a slow meal someday, but that it'll be his, Tae-ik's, treat. Hearing that Hyun-seung insists that he pays, putting his cap back on, he looks back at Hyun-seung and tells him that it's his way of showing his gratitude for showing him something satisfying today. After Tae-ik leaves, Hyun-seung returns back to the office to talk with his father. Letting out a sigh in relief, he says he'll start adjusting the factory lines immediately tomorrow and submit the approvals for expedited processing. Looking up at Hyun-seung, Chairman Jin lets out a chuckle before he asks him if he's not worried about straining ties with the military, and continues, though Han Dong-hoon might not look the part, but he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His father continues that if he were to become the Minister of Defense, then he might try to keep the Jaiwoo group in check. He replies to his father that Han Dong-hoon, that guy won't even finish his term, and that his faction will soon dissolve, while thinking to himself that if history follows its course, then Han Dong-hoon will flee the military in disgrace after his corruption scandals are exposed. Hearing his reply, his father asks him about what he's even saying, speaking as if he knows what's going to happen in the future. Hearing his father say that, Hyun-seung replies by saying that cause and effect exist for a reason. Then he says that his father deciding to bet on someone like Tae-ik was a wise decision he made. Scolding him, he says to keep those thoughts in his head and not in his mouth. He then tells him to go and grab the documents on his desk and get them signed. He then says that it's the royalty agreement that Hyun-seung asked for in the hotel. He also informs him that he'll receive 4% of the sales from the new armor-piercing rounds, and at tomorrow's group executive meeting, he'll be promoted to policy director. He then further reminds him to not mess it up, and that it's only been a few months since his return. With a warm smile on his face, he glances towards his father and says that he won't regret his choice. Taking a puff of his cigarette, he tells him that he better not, and tells him to keep working hard. With an emotional smile on his face, looking at his father, he thanks him. His father slightly blushes on this emotional encounter with his son. It's the Seoul airport, where U.S. Army FCT Representative Lieutenant General Michael is visiting Korea. Both the commander and deputy commander of the U.S. Forces Korea are here at Seoul Airport. Jin Hyun-seung with his secretary Kim Ji-ah and assistant Yang is also here at Seoul Airport. With reporters chattering among themselves about Jin Hyun-seung's recent achievements, a female reporter thinks of wanting to approach Jin Hyun-seung, but that doesn't look too good right now. She then notices him looking over in her direction. All the journalists start to panic with Hyun-seung approaching them. Hyun-seung suddenly approaches the lady reporter standing in the crowd of reporters and journalists. Hyun-seung then holds her hand, expressing his gratitude for the recent article she published and called excellent. This lady reporter's name is Han Ji-yeon. Adjusting her hair as she blushes, flustered by the sudden praise, she speaks informally as to how she was just doing her job as a journalist. With a smile on his face, Hyun-seung says that in return, he'll make sure to reach out to her first, and then asks if her number is still the same. She asks him again if he's giving her such an exclusive opportunity, to which he replies that it's not such a big deal to call it exclusive. He says that he's looking forward to another great article, and after saying that, he returns back, leaving her utterly blushing really hard. The other journalist starts hovering her with questions regarding Jin Hyun-seung, and how she, a rookie, has connection with a rising star like Jin Hyun-seung, to which she tells them to be quiet as the plane approaches close. And finally the plane lands, soon after Lieutenant General Michael with 2 other officers come out of the plane. Right after getting off the plane, he goes and greets the commander and deputy commander of U.S. Forces Korea. He then turns his head, looking around asking where he is. He finally notices him standing behind the swarm of journalists. Walking up to him, they finally shake hands, introducing each other and sharing greetings between each other. Suddenly, the deputy commander Lee Dong-wook comes up from behind Lieutenant General Michael and introduces himself to Jin Hyun-seung, mentioning that it's their first time meeting each other as well. Hyun-seung gracefully apologizes for their first meet to be in such circumstances, and then he introduces himself to Deputy Commander Lee Dong-wook, who's one of only 8 4-star generals in South Korea. With a blank expression, he tells not to apologize, saying that if their ties were any deeper, it would only raise suspicion. Looking at the deputy commander, Hyun-seung thinks to himself that he has a bite to his words, and he indirectly says to not lump him with corrupt generals. He then speaks of how deputy commander exhibits a totally different vibe than Han Dong-hoon. He further says as to how one can the energy of a real soldier from him, while Deputy Commander Lee Dong-wook and Lieutenant General Michael continue with their conversation. The deputy commander then says they take his car to the contract location, saying that the reporters will make it difficult to leave otherwise. Deputy commander then asks the commander to take care of Lieutenant General Michael, while Hyun-seung stands there looking at the shining car. With the other soldiers telling the journalists to step back a little as they're being discourteous to their VIP, Deputy Commander asks Hyun-seung if he's free anytime soon, following with asking him if they could arrange a time to meet separately.